So, oh, so welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We happen to be in different places. Many of us are in the Metro Phoenix area today, and I know your people are zooming in from all over the world. We're just about to get started, but before we start, I wanted to something we were going to talk about at this meeting was going to be a live meeting until the coronavirus came around. So we've turned all of our live meetings into virtual meetings. So there was one topic for the city of Phoenix we wanted to chat about just for minutes called Export League. One of the things the Global Chamber is very committed to is helping companies reach out virtually around the world, whether it's warm introductions or through education and connecting people in ways like this. And we care a lot about people who are supporting because we want them to be more successful. So we have a really great partner in the city of Phoenix, and we have a really brilliant man who is very well connected, economic development executive officer at the city of Phoenix. He's also the honorary consul for the UK in the state of Arizona. And similar to a lot of Hank Marshall does, we came up with a little bit of a good idea, and he turned it into a really great idea. And that's called Export. It's to help exporting companies in Phoenix connect up to the world and utilize the resources that Global Chamber has to be able to create warm connections from the city of Phoenix into Europe, into Asia, into wherever these companies want to grow. And so, Hank, I want to thank you for all the support over the years, including 5 years ago when we launched at City Hall in the city of Phoenix with Mayor Stanton and Hank Marshall. He's been supporter from the beginning. And thank you so much for the Export League idea, which we're going to be kicking off April 22nd, running through July, and helping City of Phoenix exporters be more successful. Hank, do you want to say anything about the program?
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. Let me just say, like I think everybody on this call would probably say, we're immensely grateful for you personally and what Global Chamber has done. And anytime I come up with a crazy idea, it's always fun to run it by you and not have you shake your head and hang up the phone. But like you, we've made exports a very targeted area to try and advance. We recognize that the U.S. doesn't do a particularly good job at it. And in many instances, so many companies are selling to a single client or a single region in the world. And it just struck me that given your network, it seemed like there was a way for existing exporters who we want to try and help, not new exporters, but exporters in this particular case, get into the market, in this case, without having to travel anywhere, spend 3 weeks and run around and try and meet people. So essentially the concept, and it's interesting because when you and I first talked about this idea, we were going to do this in person. This was going to be kind of classroom style. It was going to be bringing people together and having this exporter community get to know one another and share best practice, and then get into the whole notion of meeting new potential sales and buyers overseas. And with coronavirus, following your really a way to kind of adjust what we're doing without having to cancel the program, we've moved it to a virtual concept, first of its kind. So we'll figure a lot of this as we go along. But essentially what we're going to do is between now, as Doug indicated, between now and I think April, we're going to seek to recruit companies to participate in a pitch panel, if you will, where we'll have a series of exports who will hear these exporters located here in Phoenix describe their current situation from an export perspective, what their ambitions are from an export perspective. And those people on the judging panel, if you will identify who those people that will go on, who we will serve, who will kind of work with over the time, as Doug indicated, from roughly May through July, with the idea that the outcome for these companies, provided they remain engaged, they follow the format, those companies that are in the program at the end of this will get the opportunity to submit a proposal to a purchasing entity somewhere in the world. You know, it's a concept that we hope proves valuable to the companies themselves. It'll certainly be an opportunity they would never have found otherwise. And maybe they get more than one. We don't know. But I think the idea is it's to give these companies the opportunity to leverage Doug's network, the members in Doug's network, to reduce some of that, the doors that you have to go through, some of the unknowns, and they could get to a vetted opportunity of a sale, not a guaranteed sale. And we'll see how it goes. I could talk all day about it. I won't. I'm grateful for Doug's support. He's willing to be the guinea pig with us. I've got every reason to believe that we'll succeed here, and we replicate it again in the fall. And maybe it's something that you can use without your network, and other chapters can do the same thing. So thank you.
So it's appropriate that we had Hank kick off this Young Global Leaders, because he used to be young and is a global leader, and he is like who I'm going to now introduce, our moderator, Tina Swice. Hank is dangerous in a good way, and in the very many ways, Tina Swice is dangerous in very many good ways. She is, sometimes when I hear her talking through some of the things that she's done in the US and Jordan, it makes me feel like maybe she's invented everything in Jordan, and she's done every entrepreneurial venture, and she's certainly done Overachieving Women Association. She's done New Think Theater. She seems to be well connected to everybody in the world, and certainly in Jordan and in the state of Arizona. And we're really pleased to be always working with her, and especially today as the moderator of Young Global Leaders. Thank you, Tina, for all the work to pull this together, and we look forward to hearing more from these young global leaders, really young global leaders, not just Hank.
Well, young at heart too. I would like to welcome everybody, and I want to say to everyone, this Young Global Leaders initiative as part of the Global Chamber is inspired by people like Hank and Doug, who really want to connect the dots. I wanted to step in and propose this to everyone, because I feel like we can connect the dots, we can speak, and we can take the discussion into focus groups. And from the focus groups, we can actually share these ideas and recommendations with decision makers on public private partnerships, or anyone who needs that advice and inclusion. I want to give a chance for everybody to introduce themselves. I hear echo. Would like to start with Melissa Liu. And if Melissa, if you can give us a brief introduction about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Melissa Lowe. I work at Verdigris Holdings, Verdigris Capital. We are basically creating a bank for the underbanked and unbanked. I don't know if you guys are aware, but basically a quarter of Americans are locked out of the financial system. That's about 63 million adults, and actually quite a large portion also even of the Arizona population here. The reason that they're locked out is because it's very expensive to be able to serve people who live right at the edge. You know, many of you are thinking, hey, you know, I've got free checking account. Why can't other people have a free checking account? But actually you're only able to get free checking, and some of you might be like charged like $15 you know, per month or whatever it is, because you're able to hold deposits. And that may not be the case for many people who are living right at the edge, who are day workers or working for, you know, minimum wage. And so actually it's a really gigantic problem that has been unresolved because it's not profitable for banks to be able to serve them. And so at Verdigris, what we've designed and structured is actually a technology-like solution that allows us to drastically decrease the costs Many of the banking costs are because, you know, a lot of old systems, legacy systems all talk to each other. It takes a lot of manpower, takes a lot of like time and resources. And we've designed a platform that allows us to basically take all of that, streamline it, and drastically reduce costs. And so we are launching our own bank and under a consumer label. And we also offer our services to the banking industry so that they can also be able to leverage the technology, bring down their own cost structures, and also be able to serve these populations. So that's, I'm the Chief Operating Officer over at Verdigree. My background is hugely around in social impact. I've done everything from Tom's Shoes, for those of you who are aware of, like, you know, the buy one, give one, all the way out to solar for Base of Pyramid out in Africa. So I've lived all over the world. I've been out in like villages, designing products, designing business models, and I really encourage all the really great young
I'm listening.
Hello? Just encourage all of you guys to dream big and to go hard after a really good, strong solution.
I am going big and hard.
That's what they said.
All right. I hear some background noise. If everyone can mute their microphones while we're talking. I want to welcome Marco, who joined us too. Marco, I want to give you the floor. Good. Before you introduce yourself, I want to say something about Marco. I met Marco through the Global Chamber, and one thing that I felt is very crucial about having him on this panel today is that he has the ability to show perspective sideways, and this is something that I feel is very important, that you see different perspectives from a policy and a business structure in his ideas. The other thing is I would like to encourage everyone after this one to go and check Marco's website and Facebook page to see his talks that come out every now and then. They're very interesting. Go ahead, Marco.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all staying healthy and doing well wherever you're located and self-isolating. Anyhow, I started young. I was 22 when I was mayor of the city of Nogales, Arizona. And so I've had the luxury of kind of managing a city during a turbulent time back in, so I got inaugurated in January of 2001, and then September, rolls around, and I'm dealing with a crisis at the border. And so what you see today and what we've witnessed, I think, since the beginning of this presidency is how we deal with borders and how we think about our interactions internationally. And I think that's what the focus of Skybridge, Arizona, and our proximity to Mexico really cements today, especially. I've been on the phone all day, actually this whole week, trying to source, for example, N95 masks out of Mexico, and now looking at ventilators and other medical equipment for our hospitals. But it just is surprising how ill-prepared the country is to handle a catastrophe like we're witnessing on all of our TV sets and really all over the world. Case in point, though, is how we're going to come out of this and what type of economy are we going to receive after all this is over, because it will end at some point, and there will be a lot of things that are different when we do come out of this. And so specifically focused on Skybridge and the work that we're doing in Mesa, targeting e-commerce. I think that's one of the markets and one of the areas of opportunity that we're going to see grow, because today, for example, I'm sure you are all thinking about what your next order is going to be on Amazon or anyone that delivers, right? And
Right.
So if we think about the 600 million people that live in Mexico and South, we now begin to understand why we saw this trend as an opportunity 4 years ago when we started exploring Skybridge, Arizona. But I think it now makes more sense than ever. And I think it's now cementing on everyone's mind that if we don't have easy ways for logistics to reach everyone, we're missing out on an area of opportunity. So I think that's the marriage of how policy and action kind of comes together. And I think the Global Chamber has been really key to understanding that. And obviously here in Arizona, we have an opportunity to really practice it every day because of our proximity. So anyways, I can go on and on about what we used to do at Homeland Security planning for things like this. Happy to answer any of those questions, but I think that's where I wanted to start.
Actually, I wanted to continue where you stopped, because when I met with and spoke with a lot of you as panelists 2 weeks ago and even 3 weeks ago, I mean, the world was totally different than right now. The world economy seemed well on the way to a nice recovery. Trade and politic tensions were seen as not so bad. And then all the bets were going up on international connections and trade. Phoenix, Arizona was booming. And then all of a sudden we're hit by COVID-19. And I want to get into the policy part with you, Marco, on how prepared and how not prepared we were for such a national crisis. I want to move on to Joan and have her introduce herself, and then Terry, and then we would start with a discussion with questions. Joan? Dominiqué, are you there? Yes.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I'm learning like the Zoom, so I just muted myself or unmuted. I'm Joan Dominiqué. I'm a 24-year-old entrepreneur here in Phoenix Valley. I was born and raised here. I studied at Parsons School for Design in New York City, founded my company there, started with bespoke footwear, so I do shoes. I started with men's bespoke footwear, which provided me an opportunity to Paris Fashion Week. And then from there, I was able to leverage and go into ready-to-wear footwear for men's. And then I started with women's in June. And I've been running with that ever since. And recently have just opened up a Midtown Phoenix showroom, which I'm currently at. You can kind of see the front of it behind me. And that's pretty much my story.
All right, let's move to Terry. Thank you, Joan. Terry, we need to unmute you. There you go.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona. Been here for the last 2 years. Have spent a majority of my career, the last 20, throughout the greater Southwest and West, working with commercial businesses, middle market companies, and large corporates, working on providing them personal finance as well as commercial finance, here domestically as well as cross-border, and also debt capital markets, equity capital markets, and advisory services to those businesses. So it's great to meet everybody and hear all the introductions, all the amazing things that everyone's up to.
All right. I wanted to share something with all of the people who are tuning in, is that the reason we have young entrepreneurs and young global leaders in different sectors is that as we move this discussion forward, I wanted to share something now with Melissa and Terry and John and also Marco and myself. One thing that we all share in common is our international background and our experience, obviously, but one more dimension is the social impact that we all care about and the awareness we want to bring discussion today, and the ideas that we want to put forward so young global leaders can also take and have these discussions in their own countries and their own cities. I want to start with one of the questions. Of course, we're going to focus on the right now and the aftermath of the COVID-19 and how it's going to affect the young entrepreneurs' economy, their status, the closing of borders, the changes in financials, obviously, all of these questions and all of these ideas, if we can discuss them and brainstorm solutions that we can put as an article of recommendation for young global leaders to take forward and build on. Because as you can see, in a lot of the countries globally, the readiness for this pandemic wasn't there, and how fast it was hitting wasn't there. And if you actually ask on the smallest details, not a single industry was ready for it, and most crucially in the U.S. was healthcare. I took my son to an emergency tooth extraction, and I've been taking him to hospitals for 6 years and a half. Just the day before yesterday, the protocol, the policy, the rules, everything was different. It was changed because people were not prepared and ready. And then the amount of support and the amount of awareness and the amount of resources people need is a huge list. So if we can start by answering the questions, thinking of that in the back of our head. The first question I have is, there's a sharp need for more distributed, coordinated, and trackable supply of components. And Mark already mentioned his need, like across the border, for medical supplies, vendors, while maintaining an economies of scale. How do you propose international policy changes on trade, supply chain, then in the light of the global pandemic could go forward? I mean, borders are closed, suppliers are shutting down, everyone is at home. How do you propose the preparation for such a problem could go?
Well, I think that the beginning of that question is a little deceiving, simply because I think a lack of planning is no excuse for not for the situation where we're at today. I think that every day for 3 years at 7 a.m. I got a security intel briefing when I was Chief of Staff at Customs and Border Protection, and part of that included a health kind of update of activity throughout the world. And so I don't think there's an excuse for not preparing. I think every corporation, every business at least, identifies where their suppliers are at and alternate vendors and suppliers for those suppliers. And so today we are in a situation where we know, just as a quick example, that 65 to 80% of fresh vegetables in the winter come from Mexico through this corridor route from Sinaloa to Sonora to Arizona. And so that is a $5 billion industry at our border that needs to continue to work. Otherwise, if you go to Safeway here or in Chicago or anywhere in the US, you're likely not to find lettuce, cucumber, tomato, radishes, the things that come through our corridor here, through I-19 and then I-10 and then out through the rest of the country. So that only is to say that as business people, as young entrepreneurs, I think we have a responsibility to know our supply chain. And I think this highlights the need that we have to think about a couple tiers out, right? So what is my business going to do if I'm in the garment industry and one of my suppliers' factories power goes out? Well, I'd probably have an alternative to that, but I don't have 2 or 3 or 4 alternatives to that. So now it forces us to think about those next steps, and it gets us to think about not relying on government, because clearly, at least this government isn't prepared or isn't looking out for what are contingency plans. So contingency planning, I guess, becomes very important, and I think it's just highlighted now, where in the past maybe we didn't really think about that. Air travel, if we're moving goods and we rely on air cargo to move those goods, again, it's frozen. So how are we using alternate transportation to move our goods? So I just think it forces us, Tina, to think about solutions that in the past we took for granted, and today we need to think about and not rely on you know, maybe someone else is doing this for us, but it also is an opportunity for industries. I think Terry and others, right, are entrepreneurs who think about what is the opportunity that's going to come of this. And so having alternate logistical options for large corporations, small corporations. I think large corporations maybe fend for themselves a little bit better, but I think it highlights that small and medium-sized businesses depend greatly on others to help them through this time, whether it be in hospitality or now in the food service industry. I think is going to be a big issue. So I think that's just, you know, that's just the new kind of paradigm that we will live in. We have some time to think this through because obviously a lot of us, maybe not, Joan, I don't think looks like she's at her house, but everyone else is at home thinking about these things, right? So you have a lot of time. You can only walk your dog so many times a day, and then it gets kind of boring. So this is an opportunity for everyone to think about all these things.
I actually want to ask Melissa and Terry as well. I mean, to brainstorm, obviously, what solutions can Verdigris, for example, and BMO bring to low-income families who would be hit the hardest with the unemployment crisis right now, with drastic income changes? Obviously, these are your clients. These are the changes that we need to start thinking. Of course, with sudden changes in interest rates for banking as well. How do you prepare for the new volume of these prospect clients, for example? How do you help them? How do you inform them? Have you had any ideas? Have you discussed? And the floor is yours to discuss these ideas too.
So I think that for us, if I could summarize a little bit of your question, I think that there was little bit of a follow-on around distribution, which I do have some thoughts on. And the second is, how do we get, you know, products and services into very needy like populations? And I think that I'll answer the second one first, because I think that that's, you know, very domain to Verdigris in terms of like what we do. There are huge parts of the population where this COVID hitting into economic like regions can be very, very rough. I mean, these are, if we think about, you know, so much of what's been exposed over the like past few weeks, people who are living on the edge, those who are our waiters, those who are our delivery service people, people who are driving our Ubers, all people who, you know, are really dependent on those like daily checks coming in. It's really quite difficult like for them. And I think that for us, it's really been, you know, because like we are a digital bank, we provide a digital solution. So I think that, you know, in terms of some of the physicality of supply chain is less relevant for us, and actually becomes like really more of an advantage in terms of our ability to be able to outreach and to distribute. Huge things like for us, and I think this will tie into the earlier part of the question around like distribution, is being able to like really get into like communities. You know, I think that I had started my career hugely around like grassroots, and I know that like today's like conversation is really about like, you know, global collaboration and how do we get everyone like working together. And I actually do think that the building blocks of that starts in from community organizations. Like, so even for us, our introductions into neighborhoods and into, you know, cities, you know, we've actually been out to even to Yuma, working at the border, interviewing, talking with like people who are, you know, US day laborers who are crossing over from Mexico every single day. And our introduction into all of these communities is primarily through like nonprofits, through NGOs, and through organizations that are very trusted. And I think that that very real like touch and feel dynamic that is very local through trusted partners, people that are known and seen, is really important. And I think that also, you know, the larger distribution question, more from like my background, a little less from like the digital bank side. One of the areas that I've been actually reading quite a lot into, I was very inspired by Thailand's they have something what they describe as a compassionate economy, one that is not about having as much as possible, but just about having enough. This was something that was promoted by like the now past King, and he had actually referenced an economics paper that came out in the 70s that's called Small is Beautiful, and it's by E.F. Schumacher, who was like, and I think he was like an American, but who had studied quite a lot of the Southeast Asian economies. And that's actually been very groundbreaking for me in terms of thought process. So many of the entrepreneurs on our panel today are very understanding of the Silicon Valley like model of doing things. It's all about scale, and it's all about like going global very, very quickly. And I think that at times, like, our emphasis on that is great. Yes, as like a very young entrepreneur, you can go into like 30, 40 countries within your first course of like business, especially like, even if you're from supply chain building out and being able to like distribute into like multiple countries. But I think that sometimes that can come at a loss of like local vision, understanding that, hey, where you come from, the domestic like local chains, like I think about, slow foods, farmers markets, like all of the like small vendors that, who are around us and actually like support daily life. That's actually been what's been so critical within like this entire COVID like crisis. And so I think that sometimes we take the ambition of going really large very, very like quickly, and that's fine. But I think that these types of worldwide crises are also what shows us like where our vulnerabilities are. And so one of the things I would encourage all the young entrepreneurs on the panel is to think about building strong roots in your actual communities where you are, and it's really great to balance that against the ambitions and the plans of going very large and very wide. But I think that, when you are going only out this way, but with very, very skinny roots, and that's quite dangerous. But instead, you can be building really strong roots, with a domestic like suppliers, with like community organizations, with the community that's like around you. And also like, not to like look down on like, small and medium sized like entrepreneurship. Those like bodegas in New York are sometimes the only way to get like toilet paper these like days. And so I think that it's good to remember that humble beginnings and humble roots are actually often your strength and your biggest like partner, and especially in times like these.
Thank you, Melissa. Terry? Unmute your microphone. There you go.
Okay. I would say right now, kind of the focus has really been on the clients. I think some of the initiatives that you were talking about to the fringe consumer, the ones being the most impacted, just doesn't fall in my purview, and Melissa would really kind of be the expert and really touch on that. But to the small to medium enterprise and even some of the larger corporates, it's been a global outreach to all of the clients to really start to understand what is impacting them and what are they seeing, because as you all experienced so far, this continues to change so rapidly that it's been difficult to try and map trends to really understand the impacts of business. I think one of the biggest themes that we're seeing right now is liquidity and cash flow, and cash is king, not only from the business itself, but from the partners, either be it your debt partners or your equity partners, to be able to understand what is my lifeline, or how much cash do I have on hand, how much burn do I have on hand, and kind of what are my variable costs to be able to kind of work through this. One of my comments to younger entrepreneurs and or older entrepreneurs is look to your bank and or your banking partners truly as a partner with total transparency and ownership and understanding of your financials and of your business, so that they can start to understand and assist and advise on how to help you where you have those pain points. And right now we're finding it's liquidity.
I wanted to bring that question to you, Joan. I mean, I have a feeling like after this type of pandemic and this type of economic recession, obviously we're going to hear a lot of the questions that are coming up from young global leaders, young entrepreneurs who are startups, who are going to be starting over. what advice and what recommendations from in your field, and Marco included, would you give to those young entrepreneurs who are starting over after that pause? We don't know how much a lockdown is going to affect their industry, how much it's going to affect their market scaling. So let's consider these.
Well, I'm going to just jump in and say that obviously this allows us to think about how much of our workforce can do more activities remotely.
Right.
And so office space and real estate, I think, at least is going to change dramatically, right? Broadband and access to mobile applications and the ability to get goods delivered, I think that all changes as well. E-commerce and how we can easily get logistical chains to put or store product closer to the consumer base, wherever they might be, I think also becomes important. Just in this exercise, to give you an idea, just on the N95 mask, because I mentioned that because I think everyone sees it on TV, whatever channel you watch, maybe not if you watch Fox, but any other real network of news. Just masks, getting masks, millions of masks out. And not only is it a logistics issue, it's a manufacturing issue. So there's going to be need for manufacturing again, at least for critical items. So today you can get a respirator out of Mexico for $40,000, and it takes 30 days to produce one once you order it. If you listen to the governor saying that they're going to need, just from New York City, like 100,000 of these ventilators, that's a lot of months. So it's these things that it forces us to think about critical infrastructure again, that, you know, before, again, I keep repeating this because as my parents have been small business owners, or they're being construction. My mother and grandparents were in the jewelry business, and then the candy store, and then bed and breakfast. So like I see it every single day. It even changes their mentality. So this is going to spark a lot of different ways of doing business. And so the most adaptable companies and organizations are smaller ones, right, that we can move, but they're also the ones that are going to be struggling for capital. So that's where we need to, and this is why the work that Speaker Pelosi is doing now, enforcing money to go to small and medium-sized businesses and people versus just a large bailout of companies, is important, because that's, at the end of the day, I was listening to Jose Andres that I was on a panel with on Twitter panel a year ago, talking just about the restaurant workers, 600,000 in America, business owners of restaurants. What are they going to do, and how does that change their kind of the facts of life for them every single day? So anyways, capital, access to capital is going to be important. And these are all things that maybe now bankers and investors and funders are going to have to ask. If something were to happen, how are you prepared to handle that crisis? Before, it wasn't a question that folks would ask unless maybe you were in like risk management. But now I think every small business is going to have to think about, if something were to happen, that people need to stay home, because this is going to be, another virus will come in whatever 2 years or 3 years. How can you handle it?
Thank you, Marco. And I also think that the room right now for action, thinking out of the box, thinking of solutions that meet the immediate need of these. It's Joan, you're in design, and one of the things that hasn't left my mind since the day before yesterday is these doctors in Italy that have been wearing these masks that have been designed, I think, 12 years ago, and have had a redesign in a while. They're wearing them for 24 hours, and they're causing all of these different effects. As someone who's an innovator and designer, and also has a passion in social impact, what ideas can you propose for young entrepreneurs in the design industry, in the manufacturing of fashion, to step in and help?
So I think right now LVMH is leading the way in that they were able to transform their Dior perfume factories into hand sanitizer manufacturers. They're providing about 12 tons of hand sanitizers free to about 37 hospitals.
Mhm.
So I think that inspires young entrepreneurs like myself to do whatever you can, maybe rely on your creative instincts and create something that will create a necessary impact that we need in today's new world of CRVD. So that would probably be my best advice. Just go back to the drawing board and look at the necessities and rely on your skill set.
Seeing a lot of these examples, like in Spain, Zara has completely turned its factories to, instead of making clothes right now, they're making scrubs for hospitals, and they're making extra masks to support all of the hospitals and the healthcare providers. And one thing I want to propose, because I know Joan is also passionate about inspiring children to go in and make a difference as well. Joan actually is our neighbor with the Phoenix Modern School, and she's at the end of the street. And when I spoke to her, she already had that initiative in mind to actually teach kids about utilizing design or making a difference. So these are one of the things that I also want to bring forth. All of the kids are being homeschooled and are dealing with a crisis not a single book has taught them in 5 years. These kinds of outreach and these kinds of inspirations to make a difference, I think, are ideas that we can put on the table. I wanted to also talk about one thing for the aftermath of this is the effects that a lot of going global. I mean, right now, after speaking about global and how global is for trade, for scaling, for markets, right now it seems we kind of have to take a step back, and I don't want to use the word deglobalized because we're part of the global chamber, but it's thinking about what are the things that are going to be changing. And as Marco said, we took for granted like open borders, like flights, like going to different markets, thinking about how is that going to change the confidence of your industries from your experience. And I'll give 2 minutes for each of you to answer that question, so we can leave some time for others to ask you questions. Go ahead.
Okay, what was the specific question? What about open borders?
Yes, about the lockdowns and a lot of the countries closing their borders, and the effect it's going to have on airlines and the confidence for people to actually travel and go. How long do you think that impact will last? I mean, how can we address it as a young global leader?
Yeah, well, look, I think that one of the things that this is going to force to do is just force companies to become more competitive, but then again, come back to their roots. So you had roots, I mean, you know, what their core principles are. So whether you're an airline that you're not serving routes anymore that aren't productive, that maybe other ways of operating the system. So I think it's just going to force companies to make those decisions that maybe were lingering and they were thinking about making. Now it forces folks to make them. But also from a public perspective, I think it just forces us to be more thoughtful and think about, you know, what we value more. That we value, maybe, you know, we live in the state of Arizona, for example, and have people from all over the world coming here to vacation. And we have people from Arizona going, you know, other places in the world when we don't enjoy our own backyard. So maybe that forces, again, from policy perspective, how we market and how we package opportunities in our own backyard. So, and then from a just general safety well-being, again, this forces us as citizens, right? As citizens of the country, of the US, but citizens of the world, that you cannot elect dumb people. Period. I'm going to just say it. You can't elect people who are dumb, who don't care about others, who just care about themselves. I think that's the bottom line, is if you get what you pay for, right? That's the business. This is what we learn in business. You get what you pay for. Well, you also get what you vote for. And if you elect a dummy, if you put, what's the saying? If you feed them peanuts, you get monkeys, or if you buy peanuts, you get monkeys. I forget what the saying is. This is kind of what we get, right?
And that's a challenge we're facing. I mean, comparing to other countries, just by looking at leaders, I would compare a defense and containing the pandemic effect on Jordan, for example. It's a country that doesn't have much resources, but because of the leadership and because of people having that sense of community and ownership, it has changed numbers drastically. And people are on a complete lockdown, but they're tolerating it well, and they're waiting it out, and it's making a difference on everyone's health, because when the human being is your most valuable resource, you have to kind of do that.
Take care of it. And so
yes,
to your question of how long this is going to last, I think this is just the beginning. I was on emails from the hospitals here in Phoenix. They're just starting to see the spike of people coming in, getting tested and getting positive results, also testing positive. So we're going to hit that 10-day window when it all starts to pop. And so if people, I was out running errands by myself in the car, but you drive by a park and there's hundreds of people, like, they don't listen. So we have a responsibility also as individuals. So anyways, this is going to last a while. I think the president says Easter, something else happened religiously in Easter, and it's not that people go out and start working and shopping and buying. So we're in it for the long run, at least 8-9 weeks. And so you adapt to it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a wake-up call for everyone. If you look at the biodefense strategy that hasn't been edited or looked at since 2018, and that was put early 2016, you would say, well, this is predictable, the mess that we're in. I want to also give the chance for Marshall, who wanted to ask Melissa a question. Hank, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. And great conversation, great information being shared by everybody. Melissa, there was a company that was around in Phoenix, and I believe it went out of business in 2014. A company, and a great idea. The city got heavily involved in it. A lot of people got involved in it. The company was formed by a guy called Max Cohen, and the company's name was called Pocket Teller. And they were aiming for the same demographic you were, the ones that were living at the edge. And it was essentially, a credit card, a plastic card with a chip on it. And it allowed people who were making money to have money loaded to the card, not necessarily have to have a bank, but the card could be, loaded with money. But then more importantly, where we saw it was, and that was important for some of the undocumented people, where they could have the to buy stuff, but it didn't require that they divulge anything that they weren't prepared to give up. The card got loaded with money. But more importantly, the card was also ring fenced. So there were some instances where, say, the family income earner was a woman. And this is just an example I'm prepared to give you. And the woman would bring money home, it would go into the bank, and then the husband would drain the bank account and go on a drinking binge, go gamble it away, and it caused problems. That's just one example. I could give you a lot more. But what Pocket Teller did was it was able to eliminate certain things that the card could not be used for. So you couldn't use it in a liquor store. You couldn't use it in, online gambling. The card would be declined. So I guess I could tell you more about it, but I'm fascinated that those problems still exist. That if you provide banking, but there aren't any safeguards where this dynamic of money being extracted without anybody knowing about it, and there's no control over it. Unfortunately, Pocket Teller went out of business. And I'm not saying it's a dimension you have to add, but it was the two features that the city, and we had a lot of city employees, believe it or not, that were using the card.
Yeah.
Their salary to go on the card, and they wanted that card to not be able to be used for anything specifically other than what the card was allowed to spend on. Does that make any sense? Is there any, I welcome your opinion on resurrecting something like that or having an embedded control mechanism? Because I still think that problem exists.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a lot of really interesting ideas through this pocket teller example that had previously been in place. Just having worked in the space, I feel like certain things resonate and a lot of things I also really doesn't resonate. And to me, I do think that, especially for Verdigris, as like we had put together the gigantic, like, plan on how we're going to be able to service this population. It wasn't just, solving a lot of like the internal back end problems, which lowers the cost, but it's also how do we really address some of the problems that, are facing by our consumer like populations. And we did feel very strongly that certain levels of controls are quite important, but we felt that the controls weren't necessarily around behaviors, which I think that this pocket teller startup example that you brought up is more trying to control. And I think that there's a, I'm very West Coast and also went to like Berkeley for undergrad. I think that there's a certain part of me that really like feels very uncomfortable when we're trying to basically create a lot of like boxes. To me, there's something very patronizing about saying, hey, because like, you're someone who is a day laborer and making like $15 an hour or even like less than that, that somehow your social behaviors, like family behaviors are not like, those are things that we need to like monitor and try and like control, because actually, it doesn't really matter necessarily like the range of your economics, like those alcoholism, domestic violence, like, bad spending behaviors are actually across the board, across like economic like profiles. And I think that there's a aspect of profiling I'm really uncomfortable with when we're trying to like, take a certain particular population where that is more exposed because of the situations that they're in. And trying to basically try and babysit and to mother and paternalize that. So I think that I have like, disagreements as to like how that part is like done. But I said that, part of our structuring our business like model was actually to make a very clear delineation that we weren't going to do lending. So that part was like very important. And I think that that was, it's really interesting because you do see that many of like the fintech banks or many different like fintech models are all around being able to provide liquidity, which are things that are needed. But we felt that the disease of lending is often not so much on the consumer side, and it does often drive like it can drive difficult behaviors more because of the lack of like education piece. So the financial literacy piece is really important, but even more so it's because when banks are structured highly on like lending, if you think about it, right, like when you, how does like a bank work? Like, you go in and you bring like your deposits into like the bank, and the bank, while holding onto your deposits, basically lends off of it, right? I think that we are currently in a financial system where basically the banks are addicted to lending. And so I actually see like, I'm less worried about, the guy who's bought a couple extra beers than he should have, and more concerned about, the much more disease-oriented issue that we're seeing within the entire financial system, which is that, we have entire institutions that are like addicted to like lending, and many of their product offerings which can become very dangerous, for the consumer populations, whether they're poor or like, you know, well-to-do populations. That's actually the much larger like problem. But I laugh a little bit because, you know, I've dealt a lot with like microfinance, and definitely like many of like the home dynamics of like the guy going out and spending all his like money and the mom like managing back at home and is like sort of the better player. Those are things that I think that, you know, within our model, at least, like every person can only have like their own bank account. So like joint accounts aren't allowed. So at least like the good characters who are responsible, and what we've like found actually is that at the economic levels that we are working with, people are extremely smart managers. And I think that there's a lot of I would say I think that there's a lot of stereotypes around those who are poor as being poor managers of their money. And I think that actually maybe one of the positive silver linings that's come out of the entire COVID crisis is that what we're seeing is that, hey, people who are working really long hours, you know, they're trying to like sock away like the money that they do have, the sheer vulnerability of like, if they're not able to like make their shift or not able to get like paid for like that day, that actually, you know, puts like their rent at, you know, you know, vulnerable for not being able to like pay rent like within the next month. I think that what we're finding is that like people are actually really smart like money managers. They're really great at stretching like that extra dollar and actually, you know, make sure that like they make their payments for all the multitudes of things that they need to do just for daily life necessities. And it's very expensive. It's actually more expensive for a poor person to be able to handle like their financial situations that, you know, many of us here, like we've never encountered like in our lives because like we're not charged for the same things that they are. So check cashing is a really great example of this, where basically, you know, say that you receive a employer's like check, you don't have a bank account, so you can't do like direct deposit, and you actually have to walk up to a check cashier's teller like screen. If you're out in like Yuma like doing this, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon under like really hot Arizona sun. It takes you like more than an hour to be able to cash that check, and you have to give 10% of your check to the check cashier. That doesn't happen to like most of us, right? So I think that there's a lot of like use cases that have to really be examined and explored. And what we have to really see is that there's actually an exploitation that now the COVID crisis is like really bringing to head, but it was kind of hidden before. And we, you know, as a society kind of was able to ignore it because we just didn't know any better.
Thank you, Melissa. I want to always end on a brighter side. It could be a moment, or it could take a lot for policymakers to manage that crisis. But for us as young global leaders, in your opinion, how can we manage to rebuild some of the trust and create a cooperative spirit that helps other common threats that are going to attack? Can we think of ideas where we can connect the dots for a more creative economy? And then if all of you have specific emergency ideas that you want solutions for, you want connections for, like Marco already mentioned, the crisis of the masks, there's the crisis of healthcare, and then also schools are struggling with the crisis of online schooling. We want more entrepreneurs with tech technologies, with virtual reality, with work from home ideas. If any of you has some of these ideas or resources, please share them so we can take that into an article after and then continue the conversation offline.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So going to Hank's point about Pocket Teller, like they had an example of.
Do you mind introducing yourself, please?
They had an example of technology that was a blue light system that you could drop money on anyone just by pinging the phone. And it would be like an emergency resource system. Does any of you ever think of new ideas like that? The medical department, when we talked about that with India, it was using the secondary market for repurposing equipment. And there are people that I had introduced that could definitely help with that. So those are areas where there's already solutions and people in place. Are there areas like that that you guys are looking for?
Would any of our panelists like to answer or make a comment? All right. Any other questions?
I actually just wanted to comment briefly. It was a thought that I had.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jean, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's like a really great idea, and it's one that, you know, had been proposed like by a previous like company. One of the dirty secrets of innovation is actually we're all not that innovative, but there's a lot of really great ideas that are already out there. And I think specifically for YGL Group, you know, I've actually met with many of your groups from all over the world giving these types of talks, and I'm always like amazed by the types of like connections that people are able to make. Some of the best ideas that I've seen for startups have come in because, you know, one guy in Uganda had met with almost like a counterpart, you know, out in Myanmar, and they were able to realize that like many of their country dynamics, which the older people in, you know, the generationally older people within their countries were not able to understand because you know, of these countries had came in earlier. But that they were able to like cross collaborate and share. And even like for ourselves, like, you know, great ideas like from people such as yourself. I think that the executive team at Verdegree actually also comes in from very, very international backgrounds. We actually draw a lot of inspiration from Africa, where financial like solutions on apps have all been really great. So I think that read widely, connect widely. You guys have an amazing network, and definitely seed and steal and great, like take answers like, you know, that have already been developed elsewhere and adapt to your local situations.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
I think for the purpose of time, I'm going to give 2 more minutes for questions from the audience. Anyone has any questions for our panelists?
Don't be shy.
Maybe Doug does. I'm surprised, Doug.
Yeah, Doug, you don't have any questions?
I don't have a, this is Felix. I don't have a question, but just wanted to add, just a little bit of my background. I'm a supply chain manager. I'm also working on a few projects in Africa as well. And so actually as part of this issue that's going on, what I'm trying to do is to see if there's a lady who makes garments in Ghana. And I'm trying to see if, you know, talking to her to see if it's possible for her to convert to making scrubs instead of, you know, the clothes that she's currently making. So that's a project that I'm working on. I'm also doing something around shea butter. So Ghana just opened up one of the biggest shea butter processing factory in Ghana. And so I'm looking for potential, you know, buyers of that butter in the US and other places as well. So just to add one more thing, I think for a lot of the companies, I think one thing that you also should be thinking about is how do you make your supply chain more flexible? Because, you know, like in the past, it's been mostly about cost reduction, right? And actually those two are related in a way, because if you're able to be more flexible, then you can actually reduce your cost because you don't have like a very, very long supply chain, right? So you can reduce your finished goods inventory versus, you know, just having just the manufacturing cost of it. So, you know, you have to also be looking at potentially having factories here in the US or in, you know, Mexico, which is a little bit closer than in Asia, right? So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Question, Felix? Or I thought where you were headed was, are young global leaders more flexible than old global leaders? You know, for something like what you're talking about, right? Is like, hey, I'm manufacturing a product, but here's a market demand, and so I'm going to make a switch. Are young global leaders better positioned to be able to make that switch? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think that this is a question about adaptability within companies, and that is probably one of the sink or sail qualities that all companies have to have. They have to be adaptable in every respect, whether it's technology or whether it's accommodating to a crisis as this. I mean, you could look at Netflix and Blockbuster once upon a time, like they didn't adapt to the technology at the time, so it ultimately sunk Blockbuster. That's just my 2 cents on it.
Thank you, Joan.
So small and nimble is better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you have to think of, so I think companies tend to focus on just the pure cost of the product. So you have to think of the whole thing, not just, the making of the product. You have to think of how it gets here, the logistics of it, the time frame of it, right? And then the cost of not having the product on the shelf, whatever it is, that's costly. And then also having too much of it. There's some cases where customers bought a whole bunch of stuff that they can't sell anymore because nobody's going to the stores. So that's a cost that a lot of entrepreneurs, like companies in general, don't really think of. So as young entrepreneurs, we really have to think about the total cost of it, even like the ones that are not as obvious. So the flexibility part of it is extremely important as well.
Yeah, and I think what was Melissa said about the Myanmar example and Myanmar, Uganda. Those of us that are involved internationally, and one of the cool things about Global Chamber is when you're viewing the world and seeing what's going on in these places in Ghana, they learn and we learn, or we should, right? And undoubtedly, the 4 of you are that way. You're all extraordinary. You're all amazing, and you, I presume, leverage the fact that you're well connected. How do you leverage that as a young entrepreneur? How do you go out of your way to make more connections, to learn from people? What do you do to keep up to speed? What are some of the things you're doing to keep your brain alive and stay nimble?
To add to what you said, I think maybe if we give an opportunity for each of our panelists to inform us and announce something that they were looking forward to launch and talk about if COVID-19 wasn't here, but hopefully after this whole nightmare passes, we'll give this opportunity for each of you to inform us of something that you're looking forward to launch or talk about, or you would like young global leaders to know about, pandemic or not.
Perfect.
Don, we'll start with you, and we'll end with Marco.
Oh, did you try? Was that Joan?
Yeah.
Cut out.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. You actually touched on one of the projects that I'm going to be releasing soon. I delayed it just because of COVID-19, but I worked with some children in late February, and they are part of an after-school, high quality after-school programming called G-Road, and it's for kids that come from all walks of life that may not necessarily have access to like alternative roads of success or have exposure to it whatsoever. So the founder tracked me down about last year, and I've taught the kids once or twice before, and we finally did a project where it's a creative fundraising where they drew shoes for characters they created, and I'm creating their shoes into a real product, and they will be able to be bought online, and all the proceeds will go back to them for their 3 capsule shoes. So online, which will be released in probably the next couple of days, probably tomorrow, you'll be able to see like the video, the process, their sketches, and it's honestly like a heartwarming project that I've been working on. So that'll be like a really fun release that we'll be having.
Thank you. We can't wait to collaborate with you on this. Terry? Is Terry there? You? All right, let's move to Melissa.
Yeah, I think that one of the really great analogies I love is if you ever watch those like National Geographic channels, there's always like some cave that has like some small little creature or lizard that only lives in that cave and there's no other species outside of it. And it might be like translucent and gooey. And it's like just really interesting. It's basically a creature that's completely adapted to that like local, you know, conditions of like that particular cave. There's none other species that exists outside of it. And then if you go to like another cave, it'll be like another kind of like lizard completely adapted. And I think that, you know, as humans, we're in a really interesting stage of you know, evolutionary like development, where basically we are all in our own microcosms, you know, whether it's like here in like Phoenix, or if it's like in California, or it could be like in Kenya, it could be like in Ghana. And like we're all in our, like we're all little lizards inside of our own environments, but we have enough technology to be able to trade ideas, get to know each other, and be connective, and actually be able to learn all of the survival strategies of different caves from like around the world. And I think that that's very powerful. I think that like one of the things that is like really unique to this like generation that's up and coming is that you can actually go and really make friends with other entrepreneurs and other leaders from around the world like today. You know, like even myself, I had like up until like maybe like 7 years ago, you know, I had an international career, but primarily in like very large retail corporate type environments. And I was really interested in Southeast Asia and Africa. And I actually had gone on to Kiva, I think was a site of like, and just like literally found startups out in Uganda, started talking to them. And what you find is that like, you know, the education opportunities that you've had here in the States could be really useful to someone who's a startup entrepreneur somewhere else in the world who hasn't had that type of access. But they may also be working on really cool, innovative stuff and have a lot of innovative ideas because they're in a very, you know, different type of cave, and be able to feed those ideas back. And so, you know, for me, I think that be a connector, connect yourself, but not just like network for yourself, but, you know, connect those people that you're meeting from around the world and, you know, get them connected. And so for me, I think that if I had like a next venture that was, you know, social impact oriented, it's actually being able to create an institution where young leaders like yourselves from all over the world are actually really able to like connect and trade your experiences, because actually it's more important for you guys to connect and like peer-to-peer mentor each other than it is even for you to connect with your older mentors or older generations. Even for like the people that I mentor, I tell them, you know what? My ideas are out of date. Like I've always been working on innovation and the cutting edge, but actually there's just forms of business, forms of way you're seeing things, forms that like, you know, enough like Instagram and like social connectivity that I don't even want to be like a part of, but which is like, you know, your world. And so I actually think that it's more about being able to meet, to build relationships, to share ideas with people who are your own age from all over the world, and be proactive in that, connect those people to each other as well. And I think that that's like where a lot of really great stuff is gonna come from. Because, you know, for me, I already feel like I'm past, and I see that there's so much available. People are always asking me, oh, how did you do this? And how did you do that? And I'm like, you know, the ways that I did it is probably like, you know, it's already past, right? Go and invent your own new ways, because you guys are inventing the world. And today really is we're at a cusp of like technology, you know, with like fourth industrial revolution coming on, where it's not about how things used to be, it's actually how things are going to be. And you guys are the ones that are defining that.
Thank you, Melissa. Marco, we'll end with your remarks and your advice.
So I think that obviously the world has changed after this, and businesses are going to be required to think about other things, other dynamics that they didn't have to think about. For us in Mesa and Skybridge, just to focus it on how we're looking at the new world, e-commerce will continue to grow and continue to be more valuable. So the whole reason why Skybridge, Arizona made sense was because we wanted to get goods in the hands of Latin American consumers quicker than 15 days. We wanted to cut that time down to 3 days. And that's what we're going to be able to fulfill once we launch with the Mexican Customs fully in Mesa. Now, obviously, more people are going to be requiring that service. So we know that Amazon and Walmart and all the other online retailers can't build warehouses fast enough in Mexico to fulfill that demand. And that has now presented the opportunity by which what we do in Mesa is going to be more valuable and more needed than it was 3 weeks ago. So I think that you never know what opportunities are going to come your way. Our challenge is to be prepared. Our challenge is to understand data and kind of make adjustments to that data as we're digesting it, right? And sorting out the good and the bad, and quality data and data that is just noise. And as young entrepreneurs, I think that's always a challenge, right? How to decipher data that you can use and is useful for your business and your consumer, knowing and understanding your consumer, and then filtering out the noise and filtering out the things that bog you down. And I think that's the reset that we're all engaged in now, where it forces us to focus on our company strengths and really scuttle things that take up a lot of our time but aren't as productive and aren't as valuable to the end user, our customer, our consumer. So I think that's the lesson, and I think that's the kind of the way ahead.
Thank you so much, Marco. And with that note, I would like to thank every one of you for joining us and for the time that you gave and you spent. And hopefully we'll all stay positive and hang in there through this. One advice I'd like to give, as a mother who suddenly, the world feels like it's stopped for your child, and these are the generations that are coming. You suddenly have to become the leader. You have to become the jack of all trades. You suddenly become the expert in the resources that you have underneath you, and you have to really inform yourself about the changes in policy and the changes in resources that sadly, the current government is not providing. So one thing that I give as an advice is your leadership skills have to get up and start jumping so we can all get through this as a community. Thank you, everyone.
Tina, can I just check one thing at the end here? Before we close down, speaking of exactly what you just talked about in terms of what's required in the next generation, I think all of you touched on some amazing things. Brent Siebold, I believe, is still on the line, and ASU has a really interesting new entrepreneurial program that I think is worth sharing with everybody. Brent, are you still there?
Yeah, thanks so much, Doug. I want to echo some of the other folks that chimed in along the way. Great discussion this afternoon. I've been a big fan of the Global Chamber for almost a decade now. Doug and I have spent many years at SkySong, which is one of the innovation hubs at Arizona State University. If you're unaware of it, our doors are always open. We have free coffee on the second floor. We just want to make all of you change makers aware that we've launched a brand new class in innovation and venture development. And it's unique in that it's a partnership between the W.P. Carey School of Business, the Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts, and the Ira A. Fulton Schools of Engineering. It's a one-year program designed probably not for you people on this call, maybe a few of you, maybe the participants, but for our panelists, we would love to have you be aware of the program and be engaged with it, potentially from a mentorship standpoint. What we're trying to do is teach latent entrepreneurs and innovators how to solve for X in a methodological way. Most of you are well aware of the evolution from incubators to accelerators to now VC-led studios. We are running this program literally, in a studio format. So very quickly, I know we're already over time, but just wanted to show you where we stand. This is our program logo. And just a real quick overview, if I may here, sorry. Just wanted to show you the the program curriculum in a bird's eye view, knowing that we're going to be challenging people from, corporate America and global America, I'm sorry, global economic viewpoints to come in and solve for X, work the problem, as they say, over this 12-month period. So just want to make you aware of it. I put the web link in the chat of the Zoom, and I hope that Doug might be in a position to share some of the program materials with this group via follow-up email. I'll stick around over a time. Doug, if you want to take us out, I'm happy to take any questions, but also want to be respectful for everyone and their morning or dinner plans, regardless of where they might be sitting.
Probably the best thing to do is I do have the information. So what we'll do is, as follow up to this conversation, we'll do two things. We'll put up a blog with the recording, and we'll also send an email out to all the attendees and of course the panelists with this information in addition to what we talked about today. So Brent, thank you so much for sharing that, and I'll switch it back to you, Tina. Sorry to interject there, and I know you wanted to.
No, it's fine. We just wanted to end on a positive note and thank everybody for your time. Stay safe and healthy. Take care of your health.
Awesome.
And have a nice evening, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye,
everybody.
Thank you, Doug.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Doug, thanks, Tina.
You're welcome.